Hello, everyone. So without further ado, let's get started. For those of you who waited, thank you for waiting. And we'll review our secret bonus topic today. Let's share the screen and get started then. So today we are building this. My time is on the clock, and let's get started. So first of all, you want to define your origins and your planes. Here's the XYZ plane. And we want to start with create form. We're going to start with a cylinder, and then what we're going to do is we're going to mold the cylinder into the form of a pumpkin through the different layers. So let's create cylinder, and let's choose this side to create it on. This plane right there. It's going to specify as for center point, put 40. That's good enough. And then here it's going to give us some options. Diameter 40 is good. Let's keep it at 6. Height 20. Height face is 4. This is good. And you click OK. And so what this did, it created a cylinder with 6 rings, 6 layers. And what we're going to do is we're going to interact with each layer individually. And at each level, we're going to model it to the shape of a pumpkin. So we're not going to click finish form. What we're going to do instead, we're going to work on this area, modify. Let's view the model from a better position. There you go. First, we want to select the area we want to work on. Here we have our different options to select. We can select through a window, freeform, and paint selection. And today we're going to be going over each of them, just to give an idea of how they work, as well as selection filters. So when you open this, you might probably have the select all of them, except the select through. And we're going to be working with select through today because it's easier for selecting all the faces we want to highlight, just like that. You'll know you have it when you highlight it and it goes from orange to yellow. In this case, it highlighted that ring at the bottom. So we click modify, edit, and what we're going to do is we're going to constrict this ring at the bottom. Because if you look at a pumpkin, it's flat at the bottom, and it has kind of like a ring, but a ring with 0 diameter. So we're going to shrink it, shrink this loop. See how it just shrunk? And we're going to change that to 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to repeat section by section this operation. In this case, this bottom one, we shrunk it. This one in the middle, we're going to expand it. Modify again, edit form. And we're going to make this ring grow. See how it grows? We're going to leave at 150. Same thing here. $150. What this does is going to give our pumpkin shape. So it's going to be the middle form and the top form. So I see there's 4 different layers. Let's add it to 6. Let's make it so it can have 6 layers. Let's create one from scratch. And this time with 6 layers. So you guys can see the difference in different layers. 10, 6. I don't know what happened to the 4, the other one. There you go. So look at our model now. It has 6 different layers, and each layer has around it 6 faces. So click OK, and we're going to repeat this process. We're going to click Select, change our filters to Select Through, and then just go to our model and select the bottom. Starting at the bottom works best for me because I can work it one layer at a time. And you just shrink that to 0. Get on the next layer. You notice that here the layer was unevenly applied. So this is why you want to select all the faces that you're working on. Let's go back and redo that. Good. There we have our model. Select all these at the bottom. So you see it was all selected. And now we can modify and edit form. Just put it at 0. So now we repeat the same process with these middle rings. And same procedure, you just highlight it. You highlight it and make sure that you highlighted all the rings so that looks good. All the components in this ring. And you modify. This time you want the pumpkin to base out. So let's make the ring grow in this case. So ring grow. And we're going to make it grow from the center and outward 1.5. Repeat this for the consecutive layers. Let's make sure we're highlighting the appropriate layers. We're on our model. Highlighting all those layers. And we do it again. Get the center and outwards 1.5. See? It starts looking more like a pumpkin shape. Now the top, you notice that the pumpkin just grows out and then it converges at the top to where the vine is. So we're going to do exactly that. We're going to make this go inward. We're going to make this layer, the top layers, go inward and form a vine. Starting with this one. Let's shrink it. And let's shrink it from the center. There you go. Let's make it as small as possible without actually closing the hole, because we'll do that in a different operation called close a hole. But you can see this is how it looks so far. So now we kind of modeled the lateral sides of the pumpkin. Now we're gonna want to model the height aspect of it, the vertical aspect of it. So if you look at a pumpkin, it's kind of tall, more or less, not like this disc-shaped thing. So let's add some height to it, and we're gonna do it by layer. So in this case, we're gonna do it from top to bottom. So we highlighted all our parts here, and we're going to modify again, edit form. But in this case, we want to translate it vertically upward. So we grab this arrow up and start translating it. And then you see the magic. Pretty cool. So let's give that okay. Let's close a hole. You see this top layer has a hole in it, so we're gonna close a hole by doing this operation here, fill hole. And what that does is going to basically patch it up, which is fine for us because this is what we wanted anyway. We're gonna put it on fill star. It's gonna give us a star-shaped hole at the top. That's okay. Pumpkins have that star-shaped pattern on top. Now we're gonna give it even more height. Let's do that. Let's translate it even more vertically upward. And let's make this first ring on top, let's make that smaller, just so it can look like the vine is starting to form from the top. And so most of this, you'll notice, it's just as you go, you reflect in your mind what you expect the pumpkin to look like, kind of like a master model in your mind. And you mold it out as you go. Since FusionWorks 360 will express those mathematical equations for you in the model without you having to apply them. Shrink the loop. So let's shrink this loop. Let's there we go. Let's make it about that small. As a matter of fact, let's go even smaller. There you go. So we kind of modeled out the top now. Let's worry on the middle layer. So now we're going to get this middle layer right here. Select. And let me show you how to use select with paint. So select with paint is different. Instead of highlighting a window, you and selecting everything in that window, in this case, even through, and with select paint, you're gonna kind of paint over the objects or faces you want to include. And in this case, I want to include this top layer of rings right here. So I'm going to change my filters and remove select through, so I can use this select paint tool. So I'm going to use it, and what I do is just highlight all those objects. Let's do it again so I can get this last shape. There you go. So I highlight all those objects, all those faces, if you will, and now we're going to give them height. That's good. So now we're going with our next layer. In this case, it doesn't make much sense to use paint because you can't see what's behind. So let's go back to select the window. And let's change select window so we can select through the object. So if we look at our model now, it's all around selected. That's why that through selection is useful. So we go to selection options, and we're going to make we're going to give this height. As it is. Now let's just translate it. In this case, we want to translate downward. Kind of give it that, or upward to kind of give it that pumpkin shape. That's good. So let's finish form. Let's leave it as it is, and let's work on the next layer. In this case, we want to drag it downward since we want our pumpkin to have that downside. So let's put it at that, and let's drag this one along as well. There you go. That's good. So now you'll notice we have this concave area. And we're going to select this ring at the bottom right here, but we can't select it with the Windows tool since the other one's covering it. So let's use in this case, the painter tool again. Paint selection tool. Let's change the settings so it doesn't select through. And let's click and drag the painter icon through the different objects we want to select. You can also use Freeform Selection. Freeform Selection is just start, and you go around selecting the objects you want to with this kind of lasso-like tool, once you circle around, it will select all the ones that you intersected, even the ones in the middle. So it doesn't really work out for us. Let's go back to the paint tool, but that's just so you can have an idea of how it works. Paint tool. Gonna be a little bit tedious. But for you, you guys just skip ahead. And you too. So we have these two sides. Let's say we can work something around with the window tool. So you just select that side. So we inspect the object closer, and upon inspection, let's just use the window tool. And we already gave you a flavor of how you can use those different tools to select it. That's up to your personal preference. There you go. And so that got all the objects, almost all the objects, because we don't have select through. But that would select all the objects at that layer. How about that? Better. So we go to modify. Edit form. And we're going to give it some height now. Let's give it some height. Vertically. There you go. 2. Let's give it a negative height of 2. And then what we do is grab this middle layer and then extrude that. We work with that one so then we can use it. For this one, it makes sense to use paint tool selection. Let's click OK. And you'll start to notice the pumpkin kind of has some shape now. At this point, it looks more like a propane tank. That's all right. We can modify these rings as we see fit, so we can give it the proper shape. Let's see if we can change this one. This one right here, yeah. Looking better. So now let's see what would be next. Well, we can work on this top part right here. Make it look more taller. So let's do that. Better. Okay. So let's look at these rings so we can add a little bit more to get a more realistic shape of the pumpkin. There we go. Let's leave it at 85. Now it starts to look more like a pumpkin. When you start flattening it out on top. And there. And let's do that. That looks good. Let's leave that as it is. So all around, starts to look like a pumpkin. So let's add our pumpkin creases. You look at the pumpkin, it has creases on the side. Let's do that. Kind of like these bulges, but in this case, with the operation we're going to use is called crease. And you can do that with this crease tool. So let's add creases on all the sides possible. Starts looking more like a pumpkin. Do that on this side, on the top side right here too. Much better. So let's say we could use it at the bottom. You don't have to do it always, but it just looks on aesthetics. It's probably better if we don't use it at the bottom. Because when you crease it, it looks like it's going to round it even more. At the bottom, you don't want it to round. You want it to converge into the center. So if you want to, you can go ahead and play with these values. This works for me, so I'm gonna leave it as it is. click OK. And see how it leaves from a round shape at the top to a more creased shape, like you would see in a pumpkin. So this is going to simulate the bumps on the pumpkin. And usually this vine on top is not straight. It's either curved or bent. Sometimes it's not even there at all. But in this case, there's one operation we can use to make this vine look bent. And we're gonna highlight all those parts at top. Highlight all the ring. Yeah, let's highlight that. Click modify and edit form. And we're just gonna change the angle by which it occurs. So let's do a nice 45-degree angle. In there. See how it curves it? Pretty cool. So this is our model so far. And I think it's good. Now we can finish form. Finish form. And as far as modeling the pumpkin goes, this would be the hardest part, working with the create form feature of Fusion 360. Once you finish the form, you can edit it, I think, in this family tree, but it will give you this new body. The rings that you had before and the different compartments go away, so there's no segmentation as we did before, and that's okay because we got what we wanted. Now what we're going to do is let's give this pumpkin a face. Let's see which side would be best to give it a face at. And how you're going to give it a face? Easy. You're going to click construct and you're going to click offset plane. And what that does is basically creates a new plane that's offset from these primary planes that you have. So I like the view of this pumpkin from this side, right there. That looks cool. So let's create an offset plane from this plane, which would be the frontal plane. And it's asking us, okay, how far? So we're gonna click and drag to see how far we can go. In this case, it just so happens that's 34 from this highlighted blue plane. Let's bring it back a bit. 29, 30, divided by 31. So let's bring it back even further. 28. 20 sounds great. It's as close as you can get to the model. And either way, if you do offshoot and go and get a different number, don't worry, because I'll show you how you can fit the sketches of the face of the pumpkin onto the model anyway. So we just create a new plane, and this new plane basically tells us, hey buddy, you're gonna draw whatever it is on this new plane, not on the corner planes like the right, top, and frontal. So before we do that, we usually hollow out pumpkins in real life. So you usually get a pumpkin kit or whatever, and you tell your buddies, hey, let's do this. Let's carve it out. So luckily here in Fusion 360, you can do the same operation. It's called shell. So we're gonna ask for a body, and there's only one body in this case, the entire pumpkin. And you just hollow out the inside of the pumpkin. It's gonna ask you in which direction you want to hollow it out. You can hollow it either from the outside or from the inside. We're gonna do it from the inside, and we're gonna give it a thickness of 2 millimeters. So it says you can't use this thickness for it, and that's okay. I guess it's too big of a thickness. Let's go smaller then. Create a 1 millimeter thickness. So the reason with 2 millimeter thickness does not work is because it's too big. And as you can see up the top here, you can't really create a 2 millimeter thickness on this volume right here. It would overlap. So you make a smaller thickness, so geometrically you could make that shell on all the different surfaces on this object. So this is how it looks like. You can't see the inside right now, and that's okay because it's empty. But let's sketch onto the pumpkin so you can get an idea of how the empty shell looks like once we extrude it. So we create a sketch, and it's going to ask you where you want to sketch. So we're going to do it on the plane we just made. No surprise. Here, feel free to use whatever you want. I'm just going to create a simple shape. Three-point arc, and I'm going to draw. There's one arc, and then there's another arc. And then let's draw another arc again. Even if it's not complete, that's okay, because you can just click and drag your incomplete arcs and make it touch vertices with the other arc so you can complete the eyes of the pumpkin. Like that. Or like that. And it looks goofy, but that's okay. That's your creativity, whatever it is. So now let's draw another one. Just draw another line. And there's going to be the mouth of the pumpkin, so feel free to draw whatever comes to your mind. Let's make it jaggedy. Kind of like jagged teeth for this pumpkin. kind of like that. So you click escape, and you'll see you have this weird looking jagged tooth design. What we're going to do now, since I don't want to draw that again, we're going to offset it, and it's going to basically create the same design, but up or down, translated or vertically up or down from the original one. So we're going to highlight all these points, offset it. And it's going to ask us, okay, what do you want to offset? So we just select the tools. Select all these different offset points. You want to offset it 1 millimeter away, or you want it closer? So let's do it closer. Let's do it 0.5 millimeter. How does that look? Not bad. You can flip it from either top to bottom. It's up to your personal preference if you want to flip it. Let's click OK. So we offset it, and kind of gives us this funky looking jagged tooth design. And now let's put it together, because these are two different lines that are vertically offset. They're not together, and if we don't do that, we can't extrude it. So let's zoom in, and let's fill in the gap. Much better, right? So we can take it one step further and offset even more. Well, that looks good. So now let's finish the sketch. And so once we see our complete sketch, this is our pumpkin, this is our plane we drew, and the sketch we have it on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get the sketch and we're going to extrude it into this object. So we're going to create extrude. It's going to ask us, what do you want to extrude? Okay, so let's do this, all of it. Let's do all of it then. All right, he wants to do only one part at a time. So let's do only one part at a time. There, now we did all of it. It's gonna ask us how deep do you want to extrude it. Let's I don't know the distance we want to extrude it at. I want it into the pumpkin. So we're gonna click to object. And in this case, instead of giving you the distance, you're gonna indicate up to which point in the object you want to extrude. So I look at the model and I say, well, I want to extrude up to this point. That seems like a good enough point for me to extrude it towards. Right there, to this point. Let's do it up to this vertex point where the top is, and it'll extrude into the pumpkin this time. You can see it's cutting into the pumpkin up to the point where I highlighted this vertex where the top is. And now that looks sick. So now let's cut it, because we're going to create a cut into the body. Click OK. And if you look inside the pumpkin, you'll notice, hey, look, it's hollow. This extrusion, it's cutting into an empty space, and that's because we did the shell earlier. The shell created an empty space inside the pumpkin. Now we create an extrusion from the sketch into our pumpkin so we can create our face. What's left to do, you might ask? Let's give this pumpkin color. And so to do that, we're going to work with something called material properties. So Autodesk Fusion 360 lets you change the material properties of whatever object you're working on. So it helps engineers model real material properties for their simulations. It's just so happens for this one, we're gonna use material properties to get an orange color. So let's highlight this entire object. There we go. And we go click to appearance. And what it does is Autodesk Fusion 360 has a library of materials, like a database. And within this database, it has their different properties. If an engineer wants a specific, for example, polymer, because they see favorable material properties in that polymer or in this metal or in that glass, then they'll select that from this library. It just so happens we're going to scan through this and we're going to select the one that looks orange. So let's go to paint. And so this is going to take some time for you just looking through the properties that you want. And there you go. 3D painted wood. That looks orange-ish, so let's apply that. Before you want to do that, you want to go up to the top and make sure you're changing it from an individual face to a body, or vice versa. So we highlight the entire body in this case, since it thinks we're only applying it on this face, on the right eye, and we want to highlight the entire body. So let's indicate first we want to highlight the body, but on top of that, let's also highlight this entire body in our pumpkin. So for some reason it says it cannot apply at the face level, which is weird. But in that case, we'll just search for something else that looks similar to this orange that we want. Oh, well, now it applies it. Great. So we close on that. We close on that, and then we move on with life. So just a bonus tip, this is where most people can stop. If you like your pumpkin, good job. But if you want to keep on going, then what we're going to do is we're going to make this look realistic. And what I mean by that, I mean, well, you know how they have, for example, sports cars, and they have like this backlighting, and it has like very smooth lighting textures. So they do that in model. They do that through modeling, where they create the design, and this would be the design component. But they also have the rendering component, and which is where you introduce the visual effects of the backlighting, of the backdrop, you animate it. So let's do some basic rendering. And what this does is going to introduce this into like a virtual studio. It's going to introduce this object into a virtual studio, and it's going to allow us to work with the lighting, to work with how we want to change either these physical settings or introduce a decal, whatever you want. So let's do some basic ones. And we're going to change it to an environment setting, since we don't want a solid color. Solid color makes no sense. It's better if you do an environment setting. This ground plane, what it does is allows you to have either a ground for the object to stand on, or no ground. It looks better, more realistic if it does have a ground. You can flatten the ground or not. I prefer to keep it flattened, and you can reflect it or not, the object. Let's reflect it for this instance. Just to give some idea of some of these settings. Focal length, this is funny when I first found out, but you can change the focal length of the cameras in this virtual studio that's going to look on this object, so we can go closer and closer, and it starts looking like in in the anime when the main character finds out a past traumatic experience, it starts looking like that. In certain animes, or we can go further out, changes the focal length to that. So you can play around with that, whatever works for you. Let's keep it the standard 90. And exposure is going to change the settings for the object, how you want the lighting to be. If you wanted more lighting, then you're obviously going to have more exposure to that lighting. Let's click and drag. No exposure. Well, low exposure is going to give you this darkness. High exposure is going to give you this white. So let's just keep it at the standard 9.5. Depth of field, it only shows when you have ray tracing enabled. So that would be for more advanced features, I guess. If you wanted to blur, you can blur it. And I want to save these as default because I like these settings, but you can choose your own settings and customize. And we go to environment library. An environment library is going to basically, you read your studio. If you zoom around, so right now we're on the right plane, but if you zoom around and if you turn this virtual camera per se, then you'll notice you have these lightings around you. See, so that would be a light source. That would also be a light source on top. So what that does is, for each environment library, or for each environment you have in this environment library, it's going to change the lighting source. And you can play with it to your preference. It's whatever you want for the lighting source. Right now I have sharp highlights. You can put cool light. Click and drag it to put cool light. Then grid light. Then rim highlights. Soft light. Warm light. And so you can even put some other sources like field, blue, photo booth, dry lake bed. Let's give it to the standard environments for now, which would be these virtual studio looking environments. Yeah, I think it already has cool light, yeah. So let's go back to sharp highlights. makes it look very dark, very ominous. And so now what you want to do is, in this rendering, you're going to click render, right? But I'm not doing that right now. Why? Because once you click render, it's going to give you the option to customize your rendering settings. And then what that does is it's going to simulate all those settings you inputted in these scene settings and these environment library settings, and create a realistic image simulation of how your object will look with these backlighting, with these backlights included, with your environment setting included. So this is how engineers, mechanical engineers for automobiles, can get their designs and for cars looking great, can have the backlight included. So just give you an idea how the rendering works. Let's save this design. So let's pumpkin v2 public, since it's going for everyone. It's a public version of the pumpkin. And now it started to render. What the rendering tool is, it's going to take some time to simulate those settings you inputted and create your output. But once that is done, it'll save it as an image. It'll save your output as an image. You can also create other. So here you go, the render settings. You can also create other aspects of this virtual studio. You can create a video. You can create a frame by frame shot of your object 360. So it would be a turntable, and the camera would turn around the different angles around your object and create a frame by frame shot. We're gonna stay out of this for now, but if you would want to, then you stick with a standard. It will create just a one shot image of your object, and that will work. Estimated time to render this would be 10 minutes. It can sometimes take hours, depending on how complex the object is and the backlight and the settings. So now we have this object, let's find the best angle to capture an image. So you don't need to render the object to capture an image. You just need to find a nice angle, and I so happen to like that one. So you see this angle right there. And this, you can think of it as your own personal souvenir. You go to here, capture image, and what that does is save this image you have on your virtual studio, or you're not even in your virtual studio, on your working space, and just save it to your PC, or in this case to the cloud. So that would be for you guys. Once you're done with your pumpkin, you can save it and share it. Say, this is what I did. And if you open it in your PC, it will literally look like just this entire image. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it, guys. This is how you create a pumpkin on Autodesk Fusion 360. Hope you learned something, especially with the Create Form tool. I'll see you next time in the next session, hopefully with Isaac. If not, then you'll see more of me. There's plenty of me going around. So I'll stop sharing, and take care, everyone.